Okay, so I am 17. I am walking through the streets of Beverly Hills on a Sunday afternoon through the residential section, and all of a sudden I start seeing in front of me a bunch of smiley faces, more and more. Next thing I know, I can't see in front of me because it's just smiley faces. So I stop, and then I'm thinking, well, what if this never stops? What if the rest of my life is seeing smiley faces in front of me and not being able to see anything else? And then I wonder if I'll die like this. And then I wonder if maybe I'm already dead, and I'm buried, and I'm in the ground, stuck in my body for the rest of eternity, seeing nothing but smiley faces in my field of vision. And then my friend taps me on the shoulder, and they all go away. Then we keep walking.
So it's January in the year 2000. I'm in Havana, Cuba, and I'm on the roof of the Hotel Inglaterra in the Old Town, and I've just drunk a mojito, and it was only one mojito, and I'm looking out across the bay where there is a giant statue of Christ looking back at me, and the sun's going down, and as I look at Christ, I swear to God, he winked at me. It was like a flash of a aeroplane light, that kind of bright, blinking white light which came directly from Christ's eye, and it happened once, and a jolt went through my body, and I felt like I had had a religious experience, frankly. I carried on looking. I thought maybe that's some kind of trick of the light, or some kind of gimmick where Christ is wired up to flash his eyes at you, and I just carried on looking. My family was there with me. I was just staring directly at Christ because I wanted to know whether what I'd seen was real or a hallucination or a message from God, frankly. I'm not a religious person. I have even less faith in the organised religion of Christianity. I was at a point in my life when I was genuinely in question about the future and what I would do, and I think I was looking for a sign, to be honest. Not sure what the sign was, certainly wasn't expecting it from a Christian deity, but yeah, I just carried on staring at this giant Christ statue for another 20 minutes or so, just wanting to catch a glimpse of another wink, but it didn't come. It was a one-off event, and I think it was intended just for me.
I had just been at a 3-day music festival where I'd had about 3 hours sleep, I think, the entire time. I was driving back from the festival through the South Island of New Zealand, which is very national parks, rural, that sort of thing. No street lights, no housing for miles and miles. And as I was driving, I could see figures outside the car windows to either side, walking through paths in the forest. The figures were holding lanterns. They were elegant. They were going at a stately pace and weaving through the forest on their way, as far as I understood it, to go to bed. So shocker, I was hallucinating about sleeping when I was sleep deprived. Anyway, so I was gazing out to the left and right of me every so often, just sort of seeing these figures heading parallel to me and the car. I remember wondering why they were out here in the middle of what was basically nothing but national park in New Zealand, and where their possible campsite or homes were. But they would disappear, and I wouldn't notice them for a while because I was also hallucinating mattresses. Mattresses that were coming towards me as I was driving down the road, only to eventually resolve into things like a patch of water. The mattresses were bare. There were no sheets, no pillows, no bedstands or anything like that. Just the mattress. So as I was driving sort of speeding up and then having to slow down to an almost crawl and then speeding up and having to slow down to a crawl until I realised that what I was witnessing was actually something completely different. I don't know how much I remember the fact that I knew that I was hallucinating. I think I knew in the moment at the same time as the hallucination was generally occurring, because I think with the people, after a little while I was like, no, there's no way there's people out here, so I'm just making this up. And obviously with the mattresses, I had to act as if they were real until the moment that they stopped being real, which is a strange thing to do. And so I guess I knew that I was in strife. Yeah, I don't know whether there's much logic that you apply in the moment when things are happening. You just sort of have to accept them and then react accordingly.
I was having not an MRI, the one where you go through the big donut machine like in Akira, and they put a dye into your veins. And when they injected the dye into my veins, my body suddenly started to feel very, very hot. And for some reason, as a consequence of this, I started to taste pear drops extremely strongly on my palate. This ramped up until the room was made out of pear drops. All I could see was pear drops, and pear drops were coming through my ears directly into my brain. And then within seconds, it was as if the whole universe was made out of the taste of pear drops. And I started shrieking, and they shut the MRI down.
It was the summer of 2002. It was a Friday night, and I was running late to see friends at a pub in London. A friend of mine said he'd drive me there because I was running late, but we got hit in traffic and we were even later. And I remember getting increasingly more anxious as the delay continued, and I was getting later and later. My friend dropped me off a bit far away from the pub, so I had to kind of run through the streets. By the time I got there, I was apologetic and probably a bit sweaty. And I remember standing outside the pub talking to my friend Martin. I might have bought a pint already, I can't remember if I had or not. But as I was chatting to him just standing against the wall, he then just turned into a lizard right in front of me. It was a split-second hallucination, but I genuinely saw him turn into, or what I thought was him turn into a lizard. And then he was back to normal, obviously, after that. But it kind of really freaked me out. I don't remember much else about that night, apart from the fact that I think I decided straight away that the only way I could deal with this was to get incredibly drunk. So I did, and I don't remember what happened the rest of that night, but I do think I was behaving quite oddly. And the morning afterwards, I remember I was quite scared, and I think I carried that fear around for a good couple of years, really, because I hadn't understood, or I still don't, to be honest, understand what had happened or why. But I did lose a bit of confidence, and I suppose I gained a bit of fear after that for a couple of years, I think. And I also resolved again, I think, to almost medicate myself by just drinking quite a lot in the aftermath of that bit.
the second time it happened. Again, I've been drinking quite a lot. I was in Glasgow for a weekend, and I'd had a heavy night out on the day before. Then I was getting a flight back on the Sunday. I remember getting on the plane and taking my seat, and both this time like the previous time I was feeling quite anxious and thirsty, and I don't think I had any water. And then again, everyone on the plane just in a split second turned into a frog or a lizard in front of me, some sort of amphibian. All the people sort of facing forwards on this busy flight, just for a split second, turned into like a lizard or frog-like creature, and then turned back to the normal selves straight away afterwards. Again, I was scared a bit, but I kind of sat with my head in my hands for the flight, which luckily was a very short flight. But I remember being more aware of what had happened this time, because it had already happened previously. So I was freaked out, but probably not as much as the first time. I was able to deal with it a bit more easily. And thankfully, that was the last time that's happened to me. I think that's it.
Psychotic hallucinations, and many to choose from. Probably the most interesting one was the one where I became convinced that ninjas were scaling the outside of my house and that they'd been sent to kill me by somebody who I'd had a very trifling disagreement with, actually, which is almost kind of worrying. And I could hear the ninjas creeping up the masonry outside my house, and I could hear like tapping as they were testing the glass outside, and I would occasionally stick my head out of the window, and obviously the ninjas would shrink into the shadows in between the masonry when I did this. Could probably write a book about psychotic hallucinations, to be honest.
Post-pregnancy, I went through a very hypervigilant stage, and I started experiencing that sense of being watched at night, of things being outside the kitchen window, that kind of feeling. And inside the house, I would have a sense that there were things under the beds, like little demons. So what I'd hallucinate would be like a little grey demon with quite a round face, little sharp teeth like a shark's tooth, and wide-spaced horns, who would be watching me is mostly what it was doing. And the moment I would feel like it was there and look properly, it was gone. It was resolved into just shadows under the bed or in the pantry. It's gone now. Maybe there's a demon that only haunts people with children under 6 months old.
So about 15 years ago, I decided to lock myself in the house for a week in an ultimately successful attempt to get sober. On the second or third day, I'd done a lot of shaking of there was a lot of unpleasant things going on, and I sat in the front room, and suddenly the room was full of spiders, small dark spiders with legs equidistantly distributed around the edge of their bodies and no definable front or back, which were everywhere, like moving, just slowly wandering around everywhere except where I was directly looking at that moment. Like, they weren't covering everything, they weren't in one single unbroken mass, they were just sort of randomly dotted about, probably one in every square foot of space or so. In any case, I chose to interpret them as friendly, and they never came closer maybe a foot away from me, and they were there for quite a while. And they just kind of stood around, almost like a vigil, just waiting. Maybe they were waiting for me to live or die, I have no idea. But I knew they were there, and I really didn't mind.
The general autism / neurodiversity ones they're sort of basically like milder synesthetic ones. So they're more towards like a narrowing of inward focus and a blurring between my own subjective experience of the world and the actual material reality of it. So I'll often kind of think that music is playing especially for me, and the interior experience of my mind, or I'll kind of feel that saying certain phrases or doing certain repetitive physical movements has like an incantation effect on reality. So I can be very routine oriented. I don't really know any other way to describe this. There are loads of them though. Sometimes I'll deliberately stimulate myself. People refer to this as stimming, which I find quite irritating. But I'll touch certain kinds of fabric, or make myself have certain smells to arise certain thoughts or situations, or sometimes like psychogeographic experiences, like pursuing very routine routes around certain places, or ritually touching certain places will cause them to evoke or revisit old memories. No idea if any of this kind of stuff makes sense. I spend my life trying to make sense of these experiences. My conclusion is that people's sensory experiences and the way to explain them and what they mean and their touch points with reality are actually really, really varied and poorly expressed by language. But the experience of expressing them via language, art and music or whatever is essentially a way of experiencing, making sense of them, making them more real, understanding what is and isn't real. The brain is full of phantoms, and sometimes you welcome them inside and sometimes you try and expel them. But maybe sometimes expelling one phantom just creates space for whole new ones to come in. Thank you for listening. This has been my TED Talk.